Well, good evening, everyone, and happy Earth Day. And thank you, Renew, for inviting me to share in your Earth Day prayer and reflection. And congratulations, by the way, Renew, for over 40 years, I guess, of leadership and supporting the Catholic community in the United States and globally with programs and resources and pastoral services, all of which continue to touch countless lives and help us all to live our faith in the gospel that does incarnation in our world today. As we gather tonight, I just invite everyone to be mindful of the Global Climate Summit, which began this morning and which will continue through tomorrow. Convened by President Biden, many heads of state, including Pope Francis. The Climate Summit is not only a sign of hope, but a clarion call to the world community that addressing the climate crisis is very urgent. As Francis said today, we have the means and it is time to act. We are at the limit. And he called world leaders to act with courage and with justice. So far, the proceedings look very promising, but now it's the harder work to transform these promises into policy and into projects that will impact change. The framework for this presentation tonight will include reflections on creation as a way in which we encounter God in our world today, the state of the earth today, what's going on, and why do we see this as a crossroads moment in the life of our planet? Why does the state of earth matter to us? What does it have to do with our faith and our way of living in the world? And what can we do to contribute to the thriving of earth and the thriving of all who are part of our community of life? First, I'd like to begin with creation as revelation. In the reading from Lodotoc, which Jen proclaimed, Pope Francis's landmark encyclical about the state of the earth community of life, released 6 years ago now, we hear that it is in and through creation that we experience the one who created us all. The entire material universe speaks of God's love. Soil, water, mountains, everything is a caress of God. These words are breathtakingly beautiful. They summon our souls as well as our senses to awareness that God is with us, all around us, present and self-disclosing in everything and everyone that exists. Across the ages, mystics and theologians have intuited and borne witness to this truth. In the Middle Ages, the Dominican mystic and theologian Meister Eckhart wrote, "Apprehend God in all things, for God is in all things. Every single creature is full of God and is a book about God. Every creature is a word of God." Similarly, Thomas Aquinas reflected, God brought things into being in order that the divine goodness might be communicated to creatures and be represented by them. And because the divine goodness could not be adequately represented by one creature alone, God produced many and diverse creatures, that what was wanting in one, in the representation of divine goodness, might be supplied in another. But please pardon me for the Dominican references here, but I figured that since Pope Francis has the Jesuits as well as the Franciscans well covered in his theological reflection on creation, Laudato Si, I could give the Dominicans a little shout out here. Although our Judeo-Christian tradition has always acknowledged creation as the meeting place between the divine and the human, today, consciousness of God's presence in creation, the sacramental quality of creation through which we encounter God, is difficult for us to experience, to take in, to remember, to embrace in our day-to-day lives, our spiritual practices, our actions, and our choices. In gradual as well as in very rapidly paced changes in human culture and worldview, we've come to regard creation as sort of an inanimate stage, or the backdrop in which our lives are lived. With this distorted perception, our species, our consciousness, has become disassociated from Earth and from the divine, whose word and image creation embodies and reflects. For too long, we have forgotten that Earth is the living system, the mother, from whom we and all life have emerged. Her health, her well-being is inextricably connected to our own. While some cultures, such as indigenous peoples, have managed to maintain a sense of Earth's sacredness and what it means to live in right relationship with her, they are sadly a minority among us. Their voices and their wisdom are not heard in the glass and wooden boardrooms across the planet where Earth has been regarded as a commodity, and decisions have been made that have brutally assaulted her health, integrity, and sustainability for way too long. It's in the context of all this, and as an abiding sign of hope, that we gather today with billions across the planet to celebrate and honor Earth Day. In my mind, Earth Day is much like Mother's Day and Father's Day, in that it's a day that simply yet profoundly stands to remember and ritualize a critically important relationship without which none of us would be here. Like Mother's Day and Father's Day, the meaning of Earth Day is not restricted to one day. It stands to remind us of what we need to do every day to honor, sustain, and yes, reconcile, heal, and restore the most essential relationship of our lives. Interestingly, the theme for this year's Earth Day is Restore Earth. But what does restore Earth mean exactly? Is it really possible for us to restore Earth's health and integrity? What does restore Earth have to do with the restoring of our right relationship with Earth and with our Creator? Our common home, the source of all life, is indisputably at a crisis point. In the fall of 2018, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change produced the troubling findings of 91 top scientists from 40 countries. I will mention just one of several significant takeaways from the report. All agreed that the accumulation of fossil fuels and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere from the time of the Industrial Revolution until now is causing the planet to heat up at an alarming rate. Earth's global temperature has risen 2 degrees Fahrenheit since the dawn of the 19th century. According to NASA, 2020 was the warmest in a sequence of increasingly warming years, breaking all records. The consequence of this global warming are already with us. Melting ice caps and glaciers are causing global sea rise. Without white ice, which really functions to refract the Earth's the rays right back into the universe, much of the sun's energy is trapped in the planet's atmosphere, causing temperatures to rise. And as we know, the planet's warming has exacerbated drought conditions in various places, leading to enormous fires, such as we've witnessed in Australia and California. In Australia alone, the fires destroyed 46 million acres of land, killing over 400 people, 3 billion animals, and releasing smoke and other particles more than 18 miles into the atmosphere. The warming of the seas has been accelerating the incidence and the velocity of monster storms and bizarre weather patterns, as we've recently seen in Texas. Climate change and global warming have already displaced millions of people globally and devastated their livelihoods. Furthermore, warming seas create acidic conditions, and this toxicity is destroying the reefs that are food sources for the fish upon which much of our planet depends for survival. Globally, fossil fuel emissions rose 62% in the last 30 years. Although there was recorded a decrease of several billion tons of greenhouse gases due to the COVID restrictions in 2021, the largest decline in record, by the way, emissions are already back on the rise. And this is a troubling forecast of what is to come. The Intergovernmental Report on Climate Change stresses how critical it is that we radically reduce fossil fuel emissions in order to deter the impact of global warming. We have about a decade to keep this rise below 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. We are currently on a trajectory of somewhere between 4 and 5 degree rise by the end of the century, or during our children and our grandchildren's lifetimes. The impact and the consequences of climate change are not equally distributed or experienced. And presently, there are those who have the economic capacity to mitigate some of the present impacts of climate change, building seawalls around their coastal homes, increasing air conditioning, moving to more comfortable climate settings. But nevertheless, these are short-term but not sustainable solutions. Those who are economically vulnerable now, especially persons who are already living on the margins of society, are disproportionately and unjustly suffering the impact of fossil fuels on their lives. In reflecting on this reality in his book, Creation at the Crossroads, published by Renew, Father Ed Cuba brings these persons who most do not see to visibility of their specific vulnerability to global warming and climate change. He writes, their subsistence is largely dependent on natural reserves and ecosystem services such as agriculture, fishing, and forestry. They have no other resources to fall back on. Their access to social services and other protections are limited. They are forced to leave their homes and to migrate elsewhere. Inequity affects not only individuals, but entire countries. Today, the scene at the southern border of the United States provides us with a contemporary reflection on the biblical story of Exodus. Hundreds of thousands of people from as far away as Asia and the Middle East and as close as the Caribbean, Latin America, and Mexico are fleeing toward the border of the United States for liberation from lives upturned by climate-related natural disasters, food, water shortages, joblessness, and governments with limited capacities to respond. In a cruel irony, the United States, as well as other countries, which are the highest emitters of greenhouse gases, have been obstructing entry and refusing asylum to those who have become victims of our fossil fuel lifestyles and unwelcoming policies. The interconnectedness between the social crisis and the environmental crisis is evident. In chapter 4 of Laudato Si, Pope Francis writes, the cry of the earth is the cry of the poor. We are faced not with two separate crises, one environmental and the other social, but with one complex crisis, which is both environmental and social. It is no longer possible, he writes, to find a specific, discrete answer for each part of the problem. Strategies for a solution now depend upon an integrated approach to combating poverty, restoring dignity to the excluded, and at the same time, protecting nature. This interconnectedness of social and environmental crises recalls for us how important it is to stay engaged in the work associated with the 2 feet of justice, doing charitable works as well as the work of social justice. Charitable works are those which are our response to immediate needs and specific situations, like feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, caring for and healing the sick, and visiting those in prison. And the work of social justice concerns the social, political, economic, and structural dimensions, creating and sustaining the social and environmental concerns of our day and their respective solutions. We have to be involved with both, standing on both of these feet. The theme of Earth Day 2021 is Restore Earth. And within these 2 words is contained a range of ways that we can participate in the turning around of the crisis that at once is impacting the future of our beloved planet, as well as all who are part of her community of life. So what can we do? First, embrace the invitation that Francis extends to us to ecological conversion. When Pope Francis calls us to embrace ecological conversion, he's calling for a turning away from the human-centered or anthropocentric worldview that has clouded our capacity to see the ways our lives are interrelated with and interdependent on a healthy community of life. He reminds us that the notion that we have been granted dominion over Earth is an incorrect interpretation of the scriptures, and that each community is required to till and keep the Earth through protecting, overseeing, and preserving the planet in a relationship of mutual responsibility between human beings and nature. We have a God-given responsibility to protect Earth and ensure her fruitfulness and her health for coming generations. Next, we should contemplate our kinship with creation. One of the ways we can readjust our anthropocentric, human-centered lens and lifestyle is to include the daily practice of mindful contemplation and engagement with creation. Now, often we're deterred from this kind of practice because it might suggest a time commitment that our calendars just can't abide. But the daily practice can only take a few minutes. Go outside. Allow your consciousness to be captured even briefly by a flower, a leaf, a rainbow, a raindrop, water, the sky. Feel the wind on your face, the kiss of sun, or the chill of a season. Observe the flight or the sound of a bird. Witness the earth genuflecting to her sun in the morning and welcoming her moon and neighborhood of stars in the evening. Experience your kinship with Earth. Our ecological conversion involves uncentering ourselves, our species, and seeing and truly encountering the beings who are all our kin. Let creation speak a word of God and reflect the face of God to you. Fall in love with your kin. Remember, we cannot save that which we cannot love. We can also adopt doable lifestyle changes. Reduce meat in your diet. Try to eat at least one meatless meal a day. And if you're already doing this, increase your meatless meals over the course of a week. This action alone will cut the demand for meat production, which accounts for 70% of all agricultural land use and is responsible for 18% of greenhouse gases, such as methane and nitrous oxide. Growing animals for food is very inefficient. According to the UN Convention to combat desertification, it takes up to 10 pounds of grain to produce just 1 pound of meat. And in the United States alone, 56 million acres of land are used to grow feed for animals, while only 4 million acres are producing plants for humans to eat. As global meat consumption increases, so does climate impact. We know that the Amazon forest, for example, is quickly disappearing as grazing land for beef production is in high demand. The Amazon forest, in its capacity to produce humidity and rain, as well as convert carbon dioxide into oxygen, is critical to the balance of life on our planet. And this is an example of the interconnectedness and fragile calibration existing among all life forms. Every change in our lifestyle has an impact on our planet, for better or for worse. We can reduce with the goal of eliminating the use of plastics. We've all seen images of what's being called the Great Pacific Garbage Dump, or the 8th continent of the world. It's situated in the Pacific between Hawaii and California, and it's one of 5 of what is benignly called offshore plastic accumulation zones. Believe me, they are anything but non-threatening, benign. The one between Hawaii and California is twice the size of the state of Texas. It's largely composed of every kind of plastic item you and I have ever used. The garbage dump grows daily in our oceans, as these non-degradable items float continuously down through smaller waterways into larger bodies of water. Sea animals are not only suffocated by plastics in the ocean, but as the plastics begin the slow disintegration process, the sea animals consume microplastics. And these tiny particles of plastic will enter the body of the animal, feeding on the plastic. And as the feeder becomes the prey, the chemicals will pass to the predator, making their way up the food web that includes humans. In a very disturbing recent study released this past December, the placenta of 4 expectant mothers was found to contain microplastics. In small sections of each of these women's placentas, which connects the mom to the baby, at least a dozen plastic particles were found. So reducing and striving to eliminate plastics is clearly and quickly becoming a right-to-life issue. In her beautiful poem, The Hill We Climb, read at the inauguration of President Biden, the poet laureate Amanda Gorman penned the following words: "We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens, but one thing is certain: if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright." To restore Earth requires bringing mercy to scale. Alongside the individual practices through which we not only grow our kinship with Earth, our relationship with God, her creator, as well as make important contributions to Earth's sustainability and human rights, we all need to participate in the wider movements that are focusing on change at greater scales and systemic levels. I'd like to lift up just 2 of these movements. The first is the Paris Agreement. The United States, as we know, has recently re-entered the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement is a legally binding international treaty on climate change. It was adopted by 196 parties in Paris on the 12th of December 2015, and entered into force on the 4th of November 2016. The Paris Agreement's goal is to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit compared to pre-industrial levels. To achieve this long-term temperature goal, countries aim to reach global peaking of greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible to achieve a climate neutral world by the mid-century. The Paris Agreement is a landmark in the multilateral climate change process because for the first time, a binding agreement brings all nations into a common cause to undertake ambitious efforts to combat climate change and adapt to its effects. Today, at the Climate Summit, we heard President Biden say, at this very first day, that the United States will cut greenhouse gas emissions by at least 50% below our 2005 levels within the next 10 years and move toward net zero emissions by 2050. That's remarkable. For the United States, this will require dramatic changes in the sourcing of our electric power and also in growing a power and transportation infrastructure much more dependent on renewable energy such as wind and solar. It will also require dramatic cuts in the production of and emission from fossil fuels such as coal and oil. While many corporations are seeing that the bottom line can only be secured through greening their industry, others will be actively lobbying to keep the status quo. But this is where the Catholic Church, our members and institutions can leverage our influence and power to support legislation to make these critical changes permanent. The second movement that promises to bring the kind of change envisioned in Laudato Si to scale is the Laudato Si Platform for Action. The Vatican has recently announced a multi-year plan to make communities around the world totally sustainable in the spirit of Laudato Si. The plan is designed for dioceses and parishes, schools and universities, hospitals, healthcare centers, businesses and farms, families and religious orders. The overall intention behind this initiative, the Laudato Si Platform for Action, is to leverage the influence and scale of the Catholic global community to make a significant and systemic contribution to the thriving of Earth and the human community. The 7 goals of the Laudato Si Platform for Action are grounded in the Laudato Si concept of integral ecology. They include response to the cry of the earth, response to the cry of the poor, ecological economics, adoption of simple lifestyle, ecological education, ecological spirituality, and an emphasis on community involvement and participatory action. It is very exciting, it's challenging, and it's promising that the Catholic Church is undertaking such a worldwide strategic initiative engaging Catholic systems and institutions in the work of responding to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. I'm going to anticipate that Renew will play a significant role in supporting dioceses and parishes as they engage in this expression of how our church is bringing the gospel mandate of mercy, justice, and right relationship with earth to scale. So, as we consider Earth Day today and tomorrow and the days afterward, let's take a moment to consider what it is that we can and will do to restore our relationship with Earth. What is it that we can and will do to hear and respond to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor? As we do, I invite you to consider these words of the mystic and theologian Meister Eckhart. God is at home. It is we who have gone out for a walk.